Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Shevuos Mem Zayin Shevuos 47. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmer for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this eighth tzara. We're going to start on the bottom of 46b Mem Vav Amabez, the two dots, the last two dots on the page. It says that there are certain cases where a person takes an oath and then takes the money. And one of those cases is ukeshenegdo chashud, when the person who he's in a dispute with is suspected about giving a false oath. Then the person who's bringing the case will take an oath and take the money. And even if that person who is suspected of a Shevuos shav. A Shevuos shav is where you just take an oath in vain. Like, for example, you swear that a stone is a piece of gold. So even that case, then that's considered to be somebody who's suspected about an oath, even though he's not hurting anybody with his oath. He's just committing a sin against God. And the Gemara says, "My afilu Shevuos shav." What does it mean, even if someone takes a Shevuos shav? What does that mean? Why even that category? What's the assumption there? So the Gemara says, "Lo mi bayi ka'amar." It's a lo mi bayi, meaning not only this, but even this. Lo mi bayi hanach. Not only these other types of oaths, i.e. Shevuos epikradon and Shevuos edus. Not only those types of oaths, the isbuk firas mammon, where you're costing somebody money because you're denying the case, you're costing somebody money. And afilu nami hanami dikfiras tvarim ba'alma. Even in this case of Shevuos shav, where you're just saying something that's not true, but you're not hurting anybody. Nevertheless, lo mehem, and he's also not going to be believed. So it says, we're in the bottom of Mem Vav Amabez, 5 lines from the bottom. So the Gemara says, "The listening nami Shevuos bitoy." Well, if that's the case, then our Mishnah should have also listed a Shevuos bitoy. Remember, we started our Masechta with Shevuos bitoy. That's where you take an oath that you're going to eat a loaf of bread and you don't eat it. So that should also be listed as somebody who's disqualified, is chashad al shvua. So the Gemara says, no, kikotani shvua dechi kamashtaba b'shikra. So kamashtaba avos shvuos bitoy diko amemer de bekushta kamashtaba lokotani. The way Rashi is saying, Rashi understands, and there's a dispute about this between Rashi and Tosfos, is that our Mishnah only lists those cases where you're lying at the moment you say the oath. But at the moment you say the oath that you're saying, I'm going to eat bread, if you don't eat it at that moment, you're not lying. You just think you're going to eat the bread. So it's not automatically Shevuos. It's not automatically a lie at that moment. And so therefore it's not listed as a category where you're chashad al shvua. And you're not chashad al shvua. Tosfos disagrees. He says, no, our Mishnah doesn't list it, but you're still chashad al shvua if you say such a improper oath. So the Gemara says 2 lines from the bottom of 46b. Teinach ochav lo ochav. Remember we said Shevuos shtayim shein arba. We start our tractate by saying there are two types of oaths that are 4. One type of Shevuos bitoy is you say I will eat bread and you don't eat it. But what about the one where you say I ate bread but you didn't eat it? So there you did lie at the moment you said the oath. Michael and Maymar. So then what he was saying in that category? Why wasn't that listed? The Gemara explains, read our Mishnah saying Tana Shevuos shav and called a dummy way. List the Shevuos shav and anything that is in fact similar to it. And so therefore it would include Shevuos shav and Shevuos bitoy in that category. So we're on top of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. So we also listed who is considered to be chashad al shvua. If one of the people in the party was somebody who is misachik b'kuvya, he's somebody who plays with dice. He's a gambler. So Rashi explains Gazon Rabbananhu, that he's a rabbinic robber. Damrinan asmachta lokanya. Rashi says we paskin like the position in Sanhedrin. Remember, it was a machokas in Sanhedrin on Chavdal and Amabez at the bottom. Do we say asmachta is kanya or not? So Rashi is saying we say that it's like the position. This is an asmachta that's not. Asmachta is not kanya, meaning to say asmachta is where you make an agreement based upon a questionable future outcome. which you think is going to go in your favor, and it actually doesn't go in your favor, and it goes in your favor, but you defraud the other person, or you get money from the other person which she wasn't expecting to pay. So we possibly like to position that it's not binding, and so therefore you're actually taking the money. So it's rabbinic theft. But biblically speaking, he's not a robber, and so therefore we need to list this category, even though rabbinically speaking, he's disqualified, but just not biblically speaking. So Hasulam, so the Gemara says, why do we need to list a Masachik V'Kufya? So the Gemara explains, Psulik Deraisa, Tanim Psulik Deraisa, Tanim Psulik Deraisa. Okay, so that's what we just said. Hayishnein and Chashud, and let's say both parties were suspected of not being trusted about the oath. So then the Gemara records a position between Rabbi Yossi, who says Chazar Shvuel L'Makoma, that the oath goes back to its initial place, and we'll see what that means. And Rabbi Meir says Yachloku. Rabbi Meir says we split it. They split it between the two parties. Before the Gemara explains Rabbi Yossi's position, the Gemara first wants to clarify the actual text. And the reason why we need to clarify the text is because there's a klal in Shasta. In this case, where it's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Meir, the law is like Rabbi Yossi. So Amalei Ravo Rav Nachman Heichi Tanan. How do we learn? How do you read our Mishnah? Amalei Lo Yadana. He says, I'm not sure. And Hilchos Samai. So what's the halacha? Amalei Lo Yadana. I don't know. Imar Rav Yossi Parmiyumi Amar Rav Nachman Rav Yossi Amar Yachoko. So Rav Nachman has the opposite version of our Mishnah. That Rav Yossi says the two parties split it. V'chein Tani Rav Zvid Bar Rav Yossi Amar Yachoko. Another opinion that says Rav Yossi says they split it. Ikeda Amri Tani Rav Zvid Amar Rav Yossi Amar Yachoko. Amar B'tzvar Parmiyumi Ava Rav Nachman Uvda Yachoko. So in fact, it's the opposite text of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi is the one who says that they split it where they're both suspected of not being trusted about the oath. What does it mean? In our Mishnah, it said Rabbi Yossi's position is that where they're both suspicious of an oath, the oath returns to its place. Now we've said now that that's actually Rabbi Meir's position. Rabbi Yossi says Yachoko, but what does it mean when it says in our Mishnah that Chazar Shvuel Chazar? Where does it go back? So two opinions here. Amar Rabbi Ami, Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel. The rabbis of Babylon taught Amru Chazra Shvuel Sinai. The oath goes back to Sinai. What does that mean? It means status quo. You don't do anything about it. Rashi says it goes back to the oath that you took at Sinai, that God made the Jewish people take an oath not to steal. God will be the one who ultimately brings out justice if somebody denies money to his friend. But the court doesn't get involved with this, not to make an oath and not to make the payment. Chazar Sinai means to say, we leave it up to heavenly punishment here. We don't get involved because they're both suspected. Whereas know that in the case, in this circumstance, since they're both suspected, the oath goes back to the one who was originally biblically responsible. I mean, say the one who did a partial admission. And since he can't take an oath, and so since therefore he's not able to take an oath because he's suspected, he has to pay. So according to the Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel, nobody pays. According to Rabboseinu Sheva Eretz Yisrael, the one who's biblically required to take an oath, or initially required to take an oath, ends up having to pay here because he can't take the oath. So Amar Rav Papa Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel. So now we're going to say, who are these Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel, and who are these Rabboseinu Sheva Eretz Yisrael? So it says Rav Papa, the Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel is Rav Shmuel. And there's the second time we have Rav and Shmuel together. In even though they're usually the Bar Plukta, here is the second time in a row we have them together, and 2 days. And Rabboseinu Sheva Eretz Yisrael, where the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Abba. Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel is Rav Shmuel. The Tanam, because we weren't actually 2 days ago in our Mishnah, it says V'chein hayisomin lo yiparu ela b'shvuah. When the orphans come to collect, they can only collect with an oath. Remember, what did the Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel say? Rabboseinu Sheva Bavel say it goes back to Sinai and nobody collects. So we learn that from the fact that the orphans can only collect with an oath. Miman, who are they collecting from? What's the scenario where a Mishnah says the orphans only collect with an oath? If you want to say milva avuon shakil So excuse me, if you want to say from the borrower that they can only collect from a borrower that their father lent their money to with that if they come along, their father has a note on a borrower and they want to collect that note, avuan shakal beloshua, their father was allowed to collect the money without an oath. The inu b'shvua, and you want to say that they need to collect it with an oath. Normally the yisomim, the orphans, we're more lenient on, not that we're more strict on them. So if the father was able to collect that from the note without an oath, why would we say they have to collect with an oath? So this is what we mean to say, that if there's a note on an estate and the lender is the orphans of the lender want to collect from the orphans of the borrower, they need to have an oath. The Rav Shmuel, the Amri Travayu, and Rav Shmuel taught, Lo Shanu, when do we say this? Ela Shemes Malva B'chaye Lova. That's only where the lender died while the borrower was still alive, where they'd be initially able to collect without an oath. But if the borrower died while the lender was still alive, then under those circumstances, the lender was already obligated to take an oath to the borrowers. And a person cannot bequeath the right to take an oath to his children. How are his children going to know what he's swearing to? So that proves that Rav and Shmuel are the ones who say Rav Hosseinu, but Babel say that it goes back to its place. Why? Because even though here we're not suspected about an oath, but we're saying that in the circumstance where they can't take an oath, then nobody pays. They only are able to collect the money in a circumstance where they can take an oath. So that's Rav Hosseinu Sheva Babel. What's Rav Hosseinu Sheva Eretz Yisrael? Who is the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael who say that if they can't take an oath, he has to pay? That's Rabbi Abba. And this is a case which we had several times already. You might remember it. It's known throughout Shas. Yesterday we had the Pruta, the Rabbi Yosef, or 2 days ago we had the Pruta, the Rabbi Yosef. Today we have the Naska, the Rabbi Abba. A Naska is a very precious piece of metal. So it's a precious piece of metal. So there's a person who grabbed a hold of this Naska from his friend, and also Kame the Rav Ami. And he said, and it came in front of Rabbi Ami, and Yosef Rabbi Abba Kame. Rabbi Abba was sitting there. So Reuven had the Naska, Shimon grabbed it from him. So Reuven comes to Rabbi Ami, and Rabbi Abba is sitting there. Reuven says, I have one witness that Shimon came along and grabbed the Naska from my hand. He only has one witness. Amrullah. So Shimon says, in Chatvi, yes, I did grab it, Vididi Chatvi, but it was mine. So Amar Rabbi Ami, Heicheli Dainu Dine Lahai Dinas. Rabbi Ami says, what are we going to do? Name away, should we say to him, Zil show him, should we say to Shimon, go and pay him the value? Leika Trei Sahade. We need 2 witnesses. We don't have 2 witnesses. Niftere, should we say you're exempt from having to pay anything and not even an oath? Ikachad Sahada. There's one witness. Namely, Zil Ishtaba. Should we say go and take an oath that you didn't grab it? You can't take an oath that you didn't grab it. Even the Amar Miltaf Chatvi, since he said he went ahead and grabbed it, Havile Gazlan. He's like a robber. That's a question. What does it mean to say he's like a robber? So Tosa says we have to go back to Cheskas Abatim, but there's 2 explanations. One explanation is he acted like a robber and that he stole it. And so therefore he's disqualified to take an oath, because since this person that he's not able to, and another possibility is no, that since he can't take an oath here, he's like a robber who can't take an oath. Anyway, so we say he can't take an oath here. And so since he can't take an oath in a circumstance where you can't take an oath, that's the upshot of this, that he can't take an oath. So we say, and Amalei Rabbi Abba, so Rabbi Abba says, this guy should have to take an oath, but he can't take an oath. So there, anybody who is obligated to take an oath but can't take it, well, then he's out of luck. He has to pay. So that's how we know Rabbi Abba is the Rabbi Seinu Sheba Eretz Yisrael, who say that when you can't take an oath, you end up having to pay. And that's why it says Chazar Shmuel Koma, the position which initially thought was Rabbi Yossi, but now we say it's Rabbi Meir, is according to Rabbi Meir, that person would have to pay. So now Amarava Kavasa de Rabbi Abba Mistaver. It's logical to say in this circumstance where you can't take an oath that you have to pay. And what's the source for this? The Tani Rabbi Ami, because Rabbi Ami says, it says in the pasuk, Shevuos Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem. It says in the pasuk, if somebody has a claim against somebody else, that he gave him his deposit, and the guy says, "No, I didn't. It was not my fault." They should take an oath that he didn't misappropriate the deposit. So Shevuos Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem. So those two parties are the ones who take an oath. V'lo bein hayorshim. But that comes to mean that there's no oath if between the orphans. Now, what does that mean? I mean, what's a scenario where we say the two litigants would take an oath, but not the two orphans? If you want to say, we're talking about a case where he says, Mana la'aba biyad avicha, he says, where the orphan of one of the plaintiff says to the estate of the defendant, my father has $100 in your father's estate. But He says, no, I have 50. I owe 50, but not 100. Malihu, Maliavua. What's the difference if the orphans are the one who is claiming that, or the fathers? Since he's claiming, I'm certain, why shouldn't the orphan take an oath there? Elolab, so what's the case where the orphans don't take an oath? He says, your father owes us 100. And he says, I only know about half, but I don't know about the other half. So under those circumstances, the orphans wouldn't take an oath. Now, on top of 47b, if you want to say in that circumstance, the Aviv ki gavna Mechayev, that if you would say in that case where he says about half of it I know, about the other half I don't know, then he would have to take an oath. And since he can't take an oath because he says I don't know, that's why the pasuk is telling us that the heir is exempt with this claim. It's Shakral Mifter Gabe Yorshin. Will we need the pasuk to tell us that the orphan is estate from this payment, because we would have said, because without this meal, we would have said that also the orphans are obligated to pay because they can't take an oath. So must be, so that makes sense. So if you want to say that a father in this case is liable, so we need to say that the orphans are exempt. And that proves that in the case where he can't take an oath, that he's liable to pay. But we're saying he's liable to pay, but the orphans in this case are not liable. And that's what the pasuk is excluding. Ella iamis aviv ki agavna nami pater. But if you want to say not like Rabbi Abba, but like Rav and Shmuel, that the orphans, that the person in this case would also be exempt because he can't take an oath. Why would we need the pasuk to tell us that the orphans are exempt when the father himself is exempt? So that proves, like Rabbi Abba, that if you can't take an oath, you're liable. So the Gemara says, for Rav and Shmuel, what would Rav and Shmuel do with this pasuk of Shevuos Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem? Because they say that because they're of the position that if you can't take an oath, you're exempt. So they said it means Shevuos Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem l'lamed hashvuah chala al shnehem, that the consequences, they quote, Hashvuos Hashem mekadosh. Melech the Tanya Shimon ben Tarfon. Shimon ben Tarfon in very rarely cited Tana says that the Shevuos Hashem tiyeh bein shnehem l'lamed hashvuah chala al shnehem, that the consequences of this oath fall upon both of them. Meaning to say, if the defendant swears falsely, then also the plaintiff is going to be responsible because he should have given his money to a trustworthy person, and he caused this person to do chol Hashem. And also maybe he should, if he knew he was going to swear falsely, he shouldn't have aggressively pursued him to take an oath. But since we cite this obscure Tana, Shimon ben Tarfon, or not obscure, but rarely cited, the Gemara now cites other teachings that Shimon ben Tarfon says. Shimon Tarfon says, Hazara okev, achar noef minayin. How to know a person who's not the adulterer, but he arranges the adultery? How do we know that he's also committing a violation? As it says, Tamalomar lo tinaf, read it as lo tanif. So, meaning to say that such a person is also committing a sin if you arrange the idolatry. So, normally we say "Ein shliach levar avera." There's no agency for sin, but here you're not an agent, but you're helping him to sin. So, anyway, it should anyways be prohibited because of the concept of lifnei iver. So that you're not allowed to help somebody commit a sin. But lifnei iver is where the person was not able to do it on its own. But it could be in this case, say the Achronim, that person would have been able to commit this adultery on its own, but you still help him, so therefore you have a sin. Another teaching that it says in the pasuk about the Meraglim, not from our parsha, which is Parsha Shlach, but from Devarim, which is also about Shlach, about the Meraglim at the beginning of it. It says, "V'teiragnu ba'alechem," that the spies were murmuring in their tents. So Shimon and Tarfon Omer, Tartem v'ginitem ba'olo shamakom. That first you went on the tour of the land, and then you caused a insult to God in his tent. Ada nahar gadol nahar pras. It says in the pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu told them to go up and search out the land to the Amorites and come up to the great river, which is Nahar Pras. But in Bereshis, when it lists the rivers, Pras is not the biggest river, the Euphrates. So why is it called the Nahar Gadol? So Shimon ben Tarfon Omer. So what does that mean? So he says, Krav Ugabe Dihina the Itan. It says it means come close to the one who is anointed with oil, and you will also be anointed with oil. Meaning to say that Euphrates, the Pras, which is the smallest of the three rivers, which is listed in the second chapter of Bereshit, here is called big because it's mentioned next to Eretz Yisrael, so that makes it more choshev, and so therefore it's also explained. Debate Rabbi Shmuel Tana Evan Melech Kamelech. No, it means that also not arguing, but it means like the servant of the king is like the king. Treat the servant of the king with the respect of the king. Then we learned about in our Mishnah the Chanvani al Pinkaso. What does that mean? The shopkeeper on his ledger, that he takes an oath and takes money. And we had said in our Mishnah, well, what's this case referring to? A case where there is a balabayas, and he asked the shopkeeper to pay his workers or his son. And the shopkeeper says, I paid. And the workers say, we were paid. We were never paid. So the shopkeeper takes an oath that he paid the money, and he gets the money from the balabayas. And the son or the workers take an oath that they were never paid, and they take the money also from the balabayas. So Tanya, Amar Rebbe, Torach Shevuos U'ama. So there's a whole question. What is this question? Now, it's not 100% clear what the question is. It seems like, why are we taking this oath? So, Amr B'Chia, Tanina, Shneim Nishbain V'Notlim Mibalabayis. So the way he reads our Mishnah is like we have our text. So maybe there was originally not clarity about our text, but it says both of them take the oath, and then they take the money from the Baal Bayis. So Kibla Minei or Lo Kibla Minei. Did Rebbe accept from Rebbe Chia this explanation? Tashma Tanya Rebbe Omer Paul and Nishban Lechavani. The workers swear to the shopkeeper, not to the Baal Bayis, but to the shopkeeper. So this seems to not be in agreement with our Mishnah. Vim Isa, and if he accepted it from Rebbe Chia, it should have said like our Mishnah that he takes the oath to the Baal Bayis, not that the workers take the oath to the Baal Bayis, not to the shopkeeper. So Amarava Polim Nishbain LaBaal Bayis b'Mamad Chanvani Kihechi Delichsef Lumine. No, so Rava says what Rebbe means is that the workers take the oath to the Baal Bayis in the presence of the shopkeeper, so they'll at least be embarrassed. Okay, yeah, they have to, their claim is against the Balabayas, but if both them and the shopkeeper are saying mutually exclusive things, we at least make the workers take the oath in front of the shopkeeper, so they'd be a little bit more embarrassed to lie. If, well, it's his own ledger, what he wrote down for himself. Where did we say that? I don't remember saying that yesterday. So, okay, so that's today's daf. We'll stop here. Today's daf. We'll pick this up, God willing. God willing, we'll continue.